There's a man you probably know. Maybe you work with him. Maybe you grew up with him. Maybe if you were being completely honest, you are looking at him right now in the mirror. On the surface, he seems fine. He holds a conversation well, he can be charming, even funny. But the moment life asks him to be emotionally present, to talk about something real, to be vulnerable, to show up for someone when it is hard, he disappears. Not physically, emotionally. He shuts down, changes the subject, makes a joke, or simply walks away. And the confusing part is, he is not a bad person. He does not mean to hurt anyone, but the damage still happens, every single time. Today, we are going to talk about why. Welcome back to Apex. Today we are stepping into the psychology of the emotionally immature man. And before we go any further, I want to be clear about something. Emotional immaturity is not a personality flaw you are born with. It's not a character sentence. It's something that forms quietly, over years, through very specific experiences. And because it forms silently, most men who carry it do not even realize they are carrying it. But the people around them feel it every day. So let us go beneath the surface and understand what is actually happening inside the mind of an emotionally immature man, and more importantly, how a man can find his way out of it. What emotional immaturity actually looks like. The first thing you need to understand is that emotional immaturity does not always look the way you expect it to. Most people picture an emotionally immature man as someone who throws tantrums or sulks when he doesn't get his way. And yes, sometimes it looks like that, but more often it looks much quieter, much more socially acceptable, and that's exactly what makes it so hard to detect. An emotionally immature man is often the one who goes completely silent during an argument, not because he's calm, but because he has no idea how to navigate what he's feeling, so he simply shuts everything down. He is the one who responds to his partner's pain with solutions instead of presence. She says, "I had a really hard day, I just need you to listen," and he immediately jumps into fixing mode. What he doesn't understand is that fixing was never the point. Being there was. He is the one who cannot tolerate discomfort in a relationship without pulling away. The moment things get emotionally heavy, he suddenly becomes very busy or very distant, or finds a reason why this relationship is not quite right. Psychologist Lindsay Gibson, who has spent years researching this area, describes emotionally immature people as those who struggle with what she calls emotional intimacy tolerance. Their inner world is not equipped to sit inside a deeply emotional moment without feeling overwhelmed and unsafe, so they escape it in ways that can look like coldness, indifference, or even cruelty when the truth is something different. The truth is, they are running from something they never learned how to handle. Where it comes from. To understand the emotionally immature man, you have to go back. Not last year, not his last relationship. You have to go back to the house he grew up in. Emotional maturity is not something human beings develop automatically, like height or bone density. It's something that gets built in childhood through a very specific kind of relationship, a relationship where a child's inner life is taken seriously. When a child feels sad, frightened, or overwhelmed, and a parent responds with genuine presence, not just the solution, not just the dismissal, but real emotional attunement, that child begins to develop a crucial internal skill. He learns that feelings are survivable. He learns that he can feel something intensely and it will not destroy him. He learns that reaching out emotionally leads to connection, not rejection or ridicule. But what happens when that experience is consistently missing? When a child cries and hears "stop being dramatic," when a boy shares something that scared him and gets told "man up," when emotional expression is met with irritation, silence, or punishment, what that child learns is deeply damaging. He learns that his emotional world is a problem, that feelings are dangerous, that the safest thing he can do is shut them down, hide them, or distract himself from them entirely. The child doesn't consciously decide any of this. His nervous system decides it for him, and he carries that blueprint into adulthood, into every relationship he touches. This is why researchers like John Goffman have found that men who struggle most with emotional intimacy in adult relationships can often trace the root of that struggle back to environments where emotional expression was either dismissed or entirely absent. The adult man is not being difficult, he is operating exactly as he was trained to operate. Now, let's get more specific, because emotional immaturity doesn't show up randomly. It follows patterns, and recognizing these patterns in yourself or in someone you care about is the first real step towards something changing. Pattern 1. The lid goes on. When emotions become too intense, the emotionally immature man doesn't process them, he contains them. He finds a way to push them below the surface quickly. He might go quiet, he might become suddenly very logical and detached. He might leave the room, not with anger, but with a kind of emotional evacuation. From the outside, this can look like he simply doesn't care, but that reading is almost always wrong. What is actually happening is closer to what neuroscientist Antonio Damasio described in his work on emotional regulation. When a person hasn't developed the internal architecture to process strong emotion, the brain treats those emotions not as feelings to be navigated, but as threats to be survived. The lid goes on not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels more than he knows what to do with. Pattern 2. The relationship becomes a mirror, not a meeting. A deeply emotionally immature man often relates to the people in his life not as separate individuals with their own inner worlds, but as extensions of his own emotional state. If he's in a good mood, the relationship is great. If something triggers him, stress at work, a fear he hasn't named, an old wound that got accidentally touched, the relationship suddenly becomes a problem. His partner didn't change, his circumstances didn't fundamentally shift, but because his emotional state shifted, his entire perception of the relationship shifted with it. This is what psychologists call emotional reactivity, the tendency to experience your inner state as an objective truth about your external world. It's exhausting to be close to, because the people around him are never quite sure which version of him they are walking into.
Pattern 3. Accountability becomes a threat. Perhaps the most painful pattern to witness from the outside. When an emotionally immature man makes a mistake, hurts someone, lets someone down, breaks a promise, his first instinct is almost never acknowledgement. It is defense. He might minimize what happened. He might redirect attention to something the other person did. He might accept responsibility for a half a second and then immediately find a way to argue that the other person is partly to blame. And if the conversation keeps pushing him toward genuine accountability, he might escalate into anger or go completely cold. This is not simply stubbornness, it is self-protection. For a man who built his sense of self around never being the problem, around being capable, strong, and in control, admitting genuine fault feels less like an apology and more like a collapse, as if saying, "I was wrong and I hurt you," will somehow destroy the entire structure of who he believes himself to be. So instead of risking that collapse, he defends. And in defending, he abandons the person who needed him most in that moment. Here is the part of this story that almost never gets discussed. Emotional immaturity is typically talked about from the perspective of the people who are hurt by it, the partners, the children, the friends who feel perpetually unseen, and their pain is real and it deserves to be spoken about. But there is another layer of suffering that almost nobody mentions. The emotionally immature man is often profoundly lonely. Not in the way he can name, not in a way he can sit with comfortably and examine, but deep underneath the controlled surface, underneath the deflections and the walls and the patterns, there is a person who genuinely does not know how to reach another human being at a level that actually satisfies him. He can have a full social life and feel hollow in every conversation. He can be in a relationship for years and still feel unseen, not because his partner fails to see him, but because he has never learned how to let himself be seen. He has mistaken invulnerability for strength for so long that he has forgotten, or perhaps never fully knew, what real connection actually feels like. The armor that once protected the child eventually becomes the prison that isolates the man. If you recognize yourself in any of this, what comes next is not shame. Shame is not a tool for growth. It is just another lid being placed on something that needs to finally come up for air.
What is required is something much harder and much more honest than shame. It is willingness. First, name what is actually happening inside you. This sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but for a man who has never taught the language of his own inner life, it is genuinely one of the hardest things he can practice. Not "I am fine," not "I do not know," but the real, more uncomfortable, more specific answer. Frustrated, scared, ashamed, disappointed in myself. Learning to name your emotional experience accurately is not softness, it is the foundation of every skill that follows. Second, learn to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. The next time a conversation goes somewhere emotionally heavy and everything in you wants to shut down or change the subject or leave, stay. Not perfectly, not with eloquence, just stay. Let the discomfort exist in the room without immediately moving to eliminate it. This is how the nervous system slowly learns that emotional intensity is not a threat to survive, but an experience to move through. Third, practice accountability in small moments. Do not wait for the grand gesture or the dramatic turning point. Start with the ordinary, everyday moments where the honest thing to say is, "I was wrong, I did not follow through," or "I hurt your feelings and that matters to me." Each small act of genuine accountability trains a new muscle, one that was never really built before. Fourth, seek real guidance. Not a podcast to passively consume, not a book to start and put down after 3 chapters. Actual, structured support, whether that's a therapist who specializes in emotional development, a men's group where honesty is genuinely expected, or a mentor who models what emotional maturity actually looks like in action. External structure matters enormously for the man who has spent years building walls internally. You cannot dismantle a wall you cannot see clearly. Sometimes you need someone outside to point. These steps are not a personality transplant. They do not ask you to become someone you are not. What they ask you to do is become more fully the person you already are, underneath all the protection, all the conditioning, all the years of building a self that could not be hurt. That person is already there. He always has been. The question is simply whether you are willing to let him show up. Carl Jung once wrote that whatever we do not make conscious comes to us as fate. For the emotionally immature man, that fate tends to arrive through broken relationships, persistent loneliness, and a quiet growing sense that life is passing through him rather than being truly lived. You do not have to wait for fate to force the lesson. You can choose it now. If today's video opened something in you, hit like and subscribe so we can keep going deeper together. And if someone in your life came to mind while you were watching, send this to them, not as an accusation, but as an invitation, because sometimes the most important conversations begin with a video one person was brave enough to share. This is Apex. We'll see you in the next one.